Welcome to the Trails Around the World podcast. Each episode inspires you with a new idea for a long-distance trail or an adventure, someplace interesting in the world that you can discover. We tell you why you want to go and tell you how to make the dream a reality. Hello, Rox. Welcome to the Trails Around the World podcast. Thank you for joining us. Could you tell us your name, give us a little idea of your background and your adventure resume?
Sure. Hi, my name is Levi Rox Mason. Been through hiking since I was about 19. I've done the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, the Arizona Trail, the Long Trail, there's several others. And, this is sort of the passion of my life. It's made having a normal life relatively difficult because, frankly, all I want to do is hike. Yeah, so I have a diverse hiking background, and it's what I love to do. It's challenging to not hike, engaged in the rest of my life.
Yeah, from what I understand, you've got other stuff happening in your life now, so it'll be interesting for you to see how things evolve going forward, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, tell me just what about hiking and backpacking makes you love it, makes you want to do it so much.
I'm not a social hiker exactly, although the community is incredible and absolutely part of the draw. I do really enjoy my solitude, and that's what made the Pacific Northwest Trail so great. Very quiet trail, very few people hike it. So it's the solitude, the challenge of ascending and descending. I really enjoy the feeling of getting into shape and becoming a hiking machine. I really enjoy pushing my body, but above all else, it's seeing these wild places. It's seeing these incredible trees, particularly on the West Coast. It's seeing these incredible sunsets and these beautiful waters and the animals and just the environment. And whether it's the environment that exists in a natural state and has existed always in that state, or whether it's seeing the transformation of the forests as they're impacted by humans and other forces. It's just fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, and I enjoy the geology. It's just incredible. And the gift of being able to experience these things over hundreds of miles and witnessing the changes. The Pacific Northwest Trail gave me some incredible experiences that I didn't even know. I didn't even know these relationships were so intimate. And specifically what I'm thinking of right now, just to take a deep dive into it. We all intellectually know that the moon pulls the tides. We know this. But to experience the actual water racing after the full moon on the coast of the Pacific Northwest Trail, it's so powerful. And I did not realize the power of that relationship because you can actually feel it on the Pacific Northwest Trail. And it was really something to behold. And those experiences drive my passion for the thru hike. It's just incredible. We're so lucky to be able to engage in these activities.
How did you start hiking?
It's a funny story. Yeah, just a bit. Yeah, so my 19th year on the planet was not a good one, although it turned out pretty great. I had a girlfriend, and we were preparing to run off to California together. I just graduated from high school. I was working in an auto body shop. I was a pretty dumb kid, and we had these great plans, and I was so excited. And then she broke up with me, and then about a day later, I got fired from my auto body job, and it was just pretty, heartbroken and listless. And my parents lived near Bears Den Youth Hostel on 601 in Virginia. And so I came out for a visit because I didn't have anything else to do. So I was, moping around, and I did have some money saved, a modest amount, and I never really thought of, actually, I'm not even sure I'd ever even heard of the Appalachian Trail before, but my mom suggested that I go out and hike for a week or two. And I thought, what the heck? So I, bought some cheap Eastern Mountain Sports equipment, and I had, of course, no idea what I was doing. I had a giant pair of boots and knee-high gaiters and a 60-pound pack. But I went out and probably within an hour or two, met my first northbound thru hiker, and was fairly impressionable. I was about a 24, 25-year-old guy, so I immediately just looked up to him and hiked with him. What seemed like a really long time for me, but it was in reality only a few hours. But during that few hours, two things occurred. I absolutely destroyed my feet, and I absolutely knew what I was doing that summer. And so I continued hiking north. I shed weight and learned as I went, and it sort of inadvertently became an ultralight hiker, not because I had fancy gear, but because I just got rid of so much stuff. I realized that hiking very minimal state was pretty great, really. And so I hiked from Bears Den Youth Hostel to Katahdin, and at which point I took a bus back to my parents' house, took about a week off, and then took a bus down to Georgia and started hiking north again. And 980 miles later, finished my flip-flop through hike of the Appalachian Trail at my parents' front door.
An inadvertent flip-flop. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I really I knew nothing. So, and that's sort of how I got my name, Rocks. It's just dumb as rocks. At one point during those first few weeks, I had a stash of literal rocks that I thought were cool in my backpack. And somebody said, "What are you, dumb as rocks? Get rid of those things."
Gotcha. So in this episode, we plan to talk about the Pacific Northwest Trail. Can you give us an elevator pitch on that? 1 to 3 sentences. Why would we want to experience this trail? What makes this trail special? You've got a lot of other trails to compare it to, so.
Yeah. Let's see. Why do you want to through hike the Pacific Northwest Trail? It is significantly different than any of the other trails I've been on. So that really would be my elevator pitch. It's just something completely different in terms of how it hikes, the feel of it, and the ecological diversity of it. I think as far as the other trails that I've hiked, there's just no real comparison. And that's why you would want to through hike the Pacific Northwest Trail.
I've read Ron Strickland's book and also Chris Townsend's book. It is east-west instead of north-south. So instead of following the mountain ranges, it crosses them.
Yes.
What effect does that have on the difficulty? I know obviously it passes through different ecosystems, possibly in an extreme.
You're absolutely right. Hiking it east to west is really something to behold. Almost immediately coming through Glacier, I was struck by the fact that all of the other long trails that I've done, I would describe as flowing with the current of the mountains. And you kind of get on a ridge, and yes, there are ups and downs, and yes, there are big climbs and descents. But generally speaking, it's a bit like surfing. And you do not get that on the Pacific Northwest Trail. You are swimming across the current. There is just no doubt about it. You climb these, rugged and steep inclines, sometimes for hours. And pretty much as soon as you peak out, you are right back down into another river valley. And, I would have anticipated before through hiking the Pacific Northwest Trail that I would have had at least a couple of string of 40-mile days. And on the Pacific Northwest Trail, I had one. And I found myself challenged to even break 30 miles sometimes. And that came as a real surprise. So, the hiking is significantly different from any of the other long trails I have experienced. And it's rugged. You are going through super dense forests. You are going through undeveloped trails. You are bushwhacking in many places. We can talk about that in more depth because that definitely presents some challenges. But I have this funny little story about a section. As you know, the Pacific Northwest Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail intersect in the North Cascades. And my particular situation was such that I hiked down to, I forget the name of the town, but it's Pacific Crest Trail town. There's a hostel there. It's south of Harts Pass, or you get off to go to the town on Harts Pass. And I'm sorry that I'm drawing a blank on the name of the town. But anyway, I had some extra time and I hiked down there. And I did this really cool loop that I would really recommend, and we can talk about that if you would like. But the bottom line is I had to hike about 13 miles north from Harts Pass to rejoin the Pacific Northwest Trail. And the contrast between the PCT and the PNT on that day was absolutely remarkable. And it's 13 miles of this beautiful groomed trail and happy people, and you make a left onto the Pacific Northwest Trail, and within 50 feet, I lost the trail and had to go find it. And when I did finally find it, it required me to walk down the trunk of a 100-foot tall, maybe 80-foot tall giant pine tree that had fallen perpendicular and over top of the trail. And, by the time I reached my place where I would camp that night, I remember specifically crossing 53 down trees. And the contrast between that and the Pacific Crest Trail was just as stark as anything you can imagine.
Wow.
And so, this is a challenging trail, and maybe I should have included that in what did you call it?
The elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch, because if you want a challenge, this is it. It's a fantastic challenge.
Great. My next question is, what was the terrain and the scenery like? I with the PNT, that's a tough question because I know the point is that it changed so much. So
yes,
you might have a whole paragraph of response here.
I do. Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, I can say with confidence that I passed through some of the ugliest places I've ever been. And I can say with confidence that I passed through some of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Coming through Glacier, you've got these incredibly dramatic snow-covered peaks and incredible waterfalls just cascading down, and just this incredible lush diversity and flowers everywhere. I think the bear grass or something with these wonderful puff balls, and it's just, this incredible magic land that you're walking through. And then you walk through a clear cut for an hour. You walk by, and this is a strange juxtaposition, but you walk by these incredible machines that have been constructed to clear cut these forests, and you've got stacks of timber 100 feet tall, well, 50 feet tall anyway. And it's just this juxtaposition. And then, you walk through this clear cut and you make a left-hand turn and go up onto the most beautiful ridge you've ever been on, verdant and lush and filled with wildflowers and incredible views stretching for 100 miles. And then you descend into, for instance, the Kootenai Valley and the canola fields that you walk through along the Kootenai River, and these brilliant yellows and brilliant purples, and it's just the heart of agriculture, and the soil that's just black with nutrients. It's unbelievable. And then as you head further west, you walk through miles and miles of devastated, burned out forest, and then you just, for apparently no reason at all, they just didn't log or whatever, you're walking by trees as big and impressive as anything you'll ever see out, short of going to the sequoias. I mean, some of these cedar trees are six men's arm lengths around. I mean, they're just massive and giant and old and magnificent. So I don't think it's fair to say that you have to take the good with the bad, because it's all so fascinating. It's not all beautiful. It is not all beautiful. But what it is diverse, and it's an education. We were talking earlier about how my impression of the Pacific Northwest Trail is that it's a bit of a preview of the potentially worst effects of climate change. Some of the forests you're walking through have been clear cut 70 years ago or 20 years ago. And so seeing the recovering forests is somewhat encouraging until you see what they looked like, because they're more recent. And one of the things that impressed upon me, and this is just one man's opinion, one who's not particularly well versed or educated on the effects of climate change or forestry, but you do kind of get the impression that some of these forests that will never recover. And I say that because you're walking through these super dense areas of deforestation, and whether it was because of wildfire or at the hands of man, you've got, all these saplings that are coming up and they're growing 6 inches to 2 feet apart, and it's super dense and brushy, and it's just wildfire waiting to happen. And as the climate changes and things dry out, these wildfires are becoming more and more prevalent, and it's hard to imagine a lot of these forests ever really recovering. And that's scary and sad, but it also serves as a teacher. We have to do something. We have to address this because what we're doing is not sustainable. And that had never been impressed upon me in such a powerful way.
That's interesting.
And then, I don't know if you want to talk about the seacoast at all.
Absolutely. It's part of the trail.
Talk about it later.
That's an unusual thing about this trail. So many other trails are focused on mountains. Yeah. And this trail does include that coastal environment, which is a special aspect, right?
Oh, it was incredible. On what trail do you have to learn to navigate tidal chart? I mean, how cool is that?
That would be a first.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. I talked earlier about the relationship between the moon and the tide, and being able to actually see the water race after the moon as it passes, because I was very fortunate in that the moon was full while I hiked that section. And, seeing that relationship was incredible. But then, the mechanics of also having to time my day to it, because of course you can get, and I did have to put my sleeping mat and sleeping bag out on a rock. I didn't have to choose that particular rock, but the rock was sticking up above the water, and I mistimed my crossing, and so I found this cool rock, and I set my stuff up on it and watched the tide finish rising and completely surrounding the rock, and then I watched it recede in the moonlight before starting to hike again. And it's just, you just don't get that opportunity too many times in life.
No.
That was so cool.
Yeah,
that was so cool.
So you watched the whole tide cycle that day.
Mm-hmm.
That
oh
night.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, every night. Unfortunately, I did, that part of my trip, I did, fairly quickly. And in retrospect, I wish I had sort of planned my finish a little better so that I'd had more time there, because if there's a section on the PNT that deserves some time, it's that section. I don't remember how many miles it is, but I think I did it in like 2.5 days or something. And ideally it would have been, 4.
Right. Yeah, it's not a long section.
No.
It's just after you've crossed the Olympic Peninsula, right? And then you turn up the coast and you walk along the coast.
Precisely.
Ways.
Yeah.
So how would you, as we said, you've been on other trails. You talked about how it compares. You were alone. You've already answered the question about how does it compare to places you've been before. When did you do this? It was last year, 2019?
Yeah, 2019 started. I was just looking at my pictures because I wasn't sure what day I started. I got to Glacier and secured my permits on June 30th.
Uh-huh.
So pretty close to a year ago.
Right.
I started the hike on I believe the first or the second. So, and I believe I finished the first week of, let's see, July, August. So I finished the first week of September. I had probably close to 20 0 days in there. And I even had a 9 or 10 day period where I met some friends from the Pacific Crest Trail that I've remained in close contact with, as three fellows are near and dear. And we had the opportunity to summit Mount Rainier and also Mount Shuckson during that period of time. So it was a pretty great summer.
Yeah. So just for listeners' reference, when you refer to Glacier, you're talking about Glacier National Park, which is where this trail begins.
That's right.
And is also traversed perpendicular to this trail by the Continental Divide Trail, which runs down the top of the watershed on the Rocky Mountains, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was a really great experience. Actually, since you mentioned it, I'm going to do a little shout out here to a thru hiker that people might recognize. Fun size, and I believe he goes by Lynx now. I was sitting outside of the permit office waiting for the ride to get to the PNT start, because you have to get a shuttle there. And my friend Fun Size from the PC2, I haven't seen since 2013, walks up and goes, "Hey, Rox." That was super cool. And the wonderful thing about that is he was securing his permits for his southbound CDT hike. Right. And so, we had a very brief encounter, a very joyful meeting. And then I think it was either the next day or it could have been 2 days later, where the PNT and the CDT actually joined together for a few miles. I ran into Lynx again.
Really?
Had another reunion, and just laughing, just big grins and laughing. So it was fun, and we saw and met a couple other southbound CDT hikers who were starting their trail.
Right. Yeah, and then of course it also crosses, as you mentioned earlier, the Pacific Crest Trail, and goes on down to the Olympic Peninsula and many places in between. What were the time constraints that you were dealing with when you did this?
Right. So I had an interesting schedule. I do work. I own a small business that I can fortunately step away from time to time, although it's getting increasingly difficult to do that. So I had about a 2-month window, and so that was one time constraint. I couldn't be gone for more than about 2 months, which is why I picked the Pacific Northwest Trail in the first place. I needed a medium length trail. And this certainly served the purpose. And then the other thing is, my girlfriend at the time, now wife, who we're actually going to have a baby like any minute now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So she has what I have termed a big girl job that she has a very difficult time stepping away from. And so, but she wanted to participate in the thru hike as well. And she's an exquisite planner. And so she had worked it out so that she was able to join me for the first 2 weeks. And then I had, I think, about 2 weeks by myself. And then she joined me for another 2 weeks, at which point I would finish the trail. And so I did have some restrictions because I had to be in certain places at certain times. Right. And so it worked out. I mean, it just couldn't have worked out any better logistically, but it did pose a bit of a challenge because, as I mentioned earlier, the PNT is a difficult thru hike. And so the mileage that I had set for myself and the mileage that I needed to set in order to be at those locations proved to be a bit challenging, particularly in the beginning, when I wasn't in as good a trail shape as I was towards the end.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned how you didn't make the same mileage that you are used to making on ridge trails, essentially.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty surprised by that, particularly because I was in pretty good shape when I started. I finished a 118 mile run with 32,000 feet of climbing like 6 weeks earlier. So I was definitely not in, couch condition, but
Right.
even still, I found the trail challenging.
Wow. So how long did it take you?
Right. So, basically 2 months and a week minus maybe 18 to 20 days of 0 days. So,
Hmm?
it wasn't a slow through hike, which did actually contribute to my solitude. There were bubbles of hikers in front of me and behind me, and I just didn't meet them.
Huh.
I think realistically, I met maybe 20 other through hikers during that period of time. But I know for a fact that I went 21 days without seeing another through hiker.
Wow.
And, the trails are sparsely populated anyway. So I was largely alone,
Right.
which I very much enjoyed.
Huh.
But I also, I definitely got lonely.
Uh-huh. And it's about, what, 1,200 miles, right?
I think it's like exactly 1,200 miles.
Huh. What considerations would affect a person's timing for doing this trail? The seasons, the weather.
Yeah, sure. So particularly the start would be controlled by how heavy the snow was in Glacier. So it's a little silly, but I actually started my hike with an ice axe and some, what do you call those things you put on your feet? Not crampons, but
Yeah, the Cthulhu
yeah,
micro spikes or something like that.
yeah, whatever they are. Those like bungee cord and micro spikes. That's what they are. And I really, that was more the influence of Kara, because she did a bunch of research and understood that there was no real information on how much the snowpack was up high through Glacier. And the fable, I don't know if it's true or not, although they did ask at the permit office, was I equipped for snow traverses? And because I had an ice axe, because I had micro spikes, obviously my answer was yes. Turns out I did not need them, and I sent them home. I don't know, maybe in 130 miles. I forget what the name of that town is. The first real town, not Polebridge, but the other one.
Mm-hmm.
I sent them home. So snowpack would be an issue. The rest of the trail, you're really wouldn't be too many restrictions, although fire would definitely be an issue. But I had never really encountered any fire. I was largely unimpacted by fire. I did see some plumes of smoke, but my understanding was that they were up in Canada.
Huh.
And so I got very lucky.
Right.
But I can easily imagine hikes being canceled or postponed for long periods of time due to
Right.
fire.
And Kara is your wife, right?
Yes, yeah.
So, and now the trail runs essentially along the south side of the U.S.-Canada border. And how much were you aware of Canada being there while you were hiking this?
Pretty aware, really. I actually, it's worth Eureka is the name of the town that I was just trying to come up with the name. One of the coolest experiences after you get through Glacier, and I'm not sure the name of the mountain range. Maybe it could be the Selkirks. I'm not sure. And I apologize. I'm fairly lazy about names and remembering things like that. I don't know if it's a handicap or I'm just super lazy, but regardless,
It's all right.
one of the great points of the trail is that you actually hit the Canadian border on a switchback. And it's fascinating because, as your listeners may be aware, there's a giant clear cut between the borders, yards across, maybe 30 yards or
Huh.
something. It's significant. And you can follow it for miles and miles when you get a good, when you're up on an overlook, you can see this thing. And so the switchback terminates right at the border. There's literally a sign there. Canadian border. I forget, it's got the latitude and longitude. So at that point you can actually cross right there. And but it was quite a neat experience because you can look down the ridge and across what is it? I'm not sure what the body of water there is, but it's a large body of water, and you can see right across maybe 30 miles of this clear cut. And it's funny because not only can you see it if you zoom in on Eureka on Google Earth, you can actually see that for for some reason, and I have no idea why, the grass is literally greener on the Canadian side of the border than it is on the American side. And you're like, what is happening here? I have this hilarious picture of the grass being greener in Canada. And it's like, what? It's so funny.
Prime Minister Trudeau would be proud.
Yeah, well, it's a strange thing. And so that, that just stuck out to me is hilarious and a notable moment.
Let's see. Season. What is the best? When is the season for hiking this?
Well, so I think it seems to me, the day I started, I believe there were, I don't know, maybe 4 other through hikers starting that day. And we started with some what became really great friends. I think the season would be, right around July 1st and, basically 2 to 3 months to finish it.
Uh-huh.
So,
but you wouldn't want to start before July 1st.
Again, that would depend on the snowfall and glacier. That would be the controlling factor.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you would start around that time and expect 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, I think so. There's some, I don't know what the average is, but there's some statistical average. Maybe it's like 80 days or 90 days to do it. Could be 70, something like that. Yeah.
Right. Are there cultural or historical factors to discuss?
Well, certainly cultural. You're walking through rural Montana, rural Idaho, and rural Washington. And so you should be aware that if you're squeamish, you are absolutely guaranteed to encounter people in the woods carrying guns. I don't know how many guns I saw, but it's a lot. People are friendly, but not overly warm, cautious. It was a funny thing. I've never been asked what sort of protection I carry so many times. And people were somewhat aghast when I told them that I had a 1-inch long Swiss Army knife. They were relatively shocked that I was in the woods without a firearm. And I don't know if they're more scared of the bears, which is something that should be discussed, or the people, which are somewhat less interesting. But so yeah, definitely culturally encountered people with political views that were different from my own, but they were all friendly. And one of the sort of neat things about these encounters actually was not so much the political differences or the carrying of firearms, but the fact that people are collecting huckleberries. That's what they're doing in the woods during this period of time. Huckleberries are a huge cultural icon up there that I was completely oblivious of until I was there. But somebody told us that there were 42 different varieties of huckleberries, and some are more sought after than others. And I got to say, one of the big distractions, and maybe one of the reasons it took me so long to do the PNT, was you will stuff your face with berries. I mean, it is unbelievable how many berries you will encounter, and the variety of berries is fantastic. And it makes making your miles relatively difficult, because it's just these bushes that are just laden with berries. It's almost impossible to just walk by.
And there aren't all that many hikers eating them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, even if there were, even if it was packed, there are so many berries. It's just, where was it? It was in North Cascades, after Ross Lake. I forget the name of the valley. I think it was coming up Challenger Pass. It's just peak berry season, and there were like 5 different species of berries that we were walking by. Some really big, funny, like giant raspberry ones. Maybe it's salmon berries, I think they might have been called. And I actually did an equation assuming some caloric output during climbing and how many berries you would have to eat in order to counteract the caloric output of this climb. And I figured out you had to eat like 1 berry every 3 seconds. And so that's what we did during this climb, and it was fantastic. Anyway, so it is the cultural, because that's what we were talking about. That there were some cultural aspects. It was neat, getting to see these people who are making their living, gathering huckleberries,
Mm-hmm.
And then along the coast, you walk through. I forget the name of the town. I should look. You walk through the village where the movie with the vampires and the werewolves. I forget what it's called. What the book is called, but you walk through a reservation, and that was unique and interesting.
Yeah.
La Push La Push is what the town is called, outside of Forks, and that was neat. It was very it was a wonderful, actually one of the best nights I spent was on the beach at La Push.
Huh.
It's a scenic and beautiful area. The moon was beautiful.
Right. Okay. Switching a bit to equipment and such.
Mm-hmm.
Did you use any equipment that is different from your usual setup? You mentioned the snow gear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had snow gear that I found was more dangerous than anything else. I found a pool noodle on the side of the road during one of the road walks. I stuck that over the end of the ice axe, which made it significantly more safe, and it was a bright pink pool noodle, and it was hilarious.
Yep.
But that was the only sort of unusual gear.
Uh-huh.
I am a minimalist, and my gear, actually, I'm relatively cheap, but I did buy some really nice gear at one point, but it's all super ragged now. And so the PNT was a bit of a race, which could be accomplished first, finishing the PNT or the utter destruction of every last piece of gear that I had, because the PNT killed it all. I need a new sleeping bag. I need a new tent. My backpack is just falling apart from being sun bleached, and so it was pretty funny. Pretty raggedy.
Uh-huh. What is your base weight like for through hiking in the summer?
I'm not sure. I would say I gotta think it's around 10 pounds, maybe
Really?
12 pounds. Yeah, it's not super, super light, but it's not super heavy. One of the things to discuss would be the fact that you are going through bear country on the PNT, and so a lot of the areas where you're walking through, bear canisters or bear bags, I forget what they're called, but are required. And even if they're not required, they are absolutely a must-have piece of gear. And I'm sorry, I just can't remember the name of maybe it's like Ursack or Ursack or something.
Ursack, yeah.
Ursack, yeah.
That's the white bear bag that you can buy, which is not always approved in some of those Western national parks, but
that's absolutely right. In fact, I had to rent a bear canister in the Olympics, which wasn't too big a deal. Although, because I'm accustomed to, I have this granite gear food bag that weighs absolutely nothing.
Right.
That I normally carry. In this case, I carried the Ursack everywhere on the trail except for through the Olympics, and that thing's fairly heavy.
The Ursack.
And, okay, it's fairly heavy if you are a wimp like me.
No, I'm just thinking. I have a bear canister and I have an Ursack.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got the Ursack, if I can possibly help it, I will take the Ursack instead of the bear canister because of the difference in weight and packability.
Absolutely. But that just illustrates what a sissy I am. That the Ursack is, basically too much to carry.
Well, you're about to be in the same. When you have children with you, it's not something you're compromising on. You're taking that kind of protection.
Sure. Well, I wasn't willing to compromise on it anyway. I mean, I'm very sensitive to the wild areas. There's a lot of controversy actually about the Pacific Northwest Trail as it passes through western Montana. And the Yak Valley and
Mm-hmm.
the Yak Mountains around there. There is a bear population that is really struggling there, and I don't know what the answer is, but there's a bear population. They're isolated for whatever reason, and there's a lot of controversy about where the trail goes through there, because there are people who want to protect the bears and who simply don't want a national scenic trail going through there because they believe that it will negatively impact the bears. Now, the controversy comes from A, is this true? B, what are the gentleman's concerns? Are they really for the bears, or is he simply using that as a straw man for the forestry industry, which is doing some huge logging and some road developing in an adjacent area? I gave an interview to Outside Magazine, either Outside or Backpacker, I can't remember, which should be published at some point, that discusses these issues.
Uh-huh.
And so the point here is not to really bring up the controversy. The point really is to just discuss how delicate the situation is with the bears in some of these places, and how serious bear protection has to be taken. You know, we had bear spray, we had the Ursac, and we absolutely were careful about bear hangs and, you know, what we did with our food.
Right.
And that's something that you really have to be aware of and take seriously, because, you know, one little slip up could result in a dead bear. And, you know,
Right.
that's the last thing that we would want. I actually considered not going through that area before I left because of a podcast that I listened to. I forget what it's called, but it was on, I heard it on the Home of the Brave podcast. People could find it if they wanted.
Okay.
And, you know, it really scared me because, you know, the last thing I want to do is cause a bear any harm or
Right.
encroach in their habitat. So,
Apart from protecting your food, how were bear encounters?
so despite all of the discussion about the yak bears, I did not see any bears until I got to the Olympic Peninsula.
Really?
And every sighting occurred in one day. I saw 5 bears, and they were concentrated in one. I don't know where it is, but it's, you know, it was towards the end of the Olympic National Park, and there's some section. I think it's maybe a 17-mile section that is heavily impacted and trafficked by people. And it also, so on the same day that I saw the most bears, I also saw the most people, and they were all within close proximity. But I don't think that I was any closer than 100 yards to a bear at any point that I knew of.
Right. What piece of equipment, back to equipment, what piece of equipment are you most happy that you had with you?
Oh, well, I was really happy to have my tent.
Which tent did you have?
I have a what is it? It's a Big Agnes, Fly Creek, and I actually sprung for the Platinum. So
Uh-huh.
it's an extremely light tent. And despite it being so light, I mean, it did the entire PCT. It did the Arizona Trail. It did the Long Trail. It did the
Wow.
Ozark Highland Trail. I mean, this thing's got some serious miles on it.
Yeah.
And it does now look, after all those miles, it now has a broken pole, and it also does kind of resemble a tent that survived a bear attack. It did not, but it looks like it. So that was a fantastic piece of equipment.
Uh-huh.
It served well. It was worth every penny I paid for it, but it does need to be retired. And I was super happy I had it because, you know, you're walking through a rainforest for a lot of the PNT. And so it rained a lot. And at one point, I don't know if it was, it was not in Glacier. I'm not sure where it was exactly, but I did actually get hailed on.
Huh.
And so I was grateful to have a good tent during those events.
I'll bet. What did you take that you would leave behind if you went back?
What did I take that I would leave behind if I went back? Well, Obviously, the snow equipment was totally useless and an encumbrance. And the other thing is, I hike in chacos, and as you can imagine,
These are
I was
sand.
prepared. Yeah, these are sandals. Yeah, yeah, and I love them. They are wonderful. I don't mess with socks. It's just so easy. Your feet get wet and then they dry within 5 minutes. But as you can imagine, if you're prepared for snow, chacos would be less than ideal. So the first, whatever that section is between the start and the town of Eureka, where I was able to send my gear home, I had to walk in shoes, actual shoes, and
Hmm.
it was miserable. I don't know how people do it.
What do you wish you had taken?
What do I wish I had taken? You know, I take photos with my iPhone, and it's adequate, but there were some moments on the PNT where I really wish I had had a better camera, because the scenery, particularly through Glacier and at other points, and of course the coast, a really nice camera would have had some tremendous benefit.
That's a good tip. So obviously you camped a good deal. Is how much opportunity is there for not camping? Is it really camping 95% of the way, or how does that break down?
Yeah, yeah, I think you're mostly camping. Obviously, every time you resupply. I'm a spoiled hiker. I definitely like my hotel room
Hmm.
and shower.
Right.
So I did take advantage of that. And I like my 0 days for sure. But yeah, you're mostly just camping. There are a couple of shelters along the way, very few. I remember encountering one that would have been ideal to sleep in the Olympics, but frankly, it was really just gross in there. So despite having the opportunity to stay in the shelter, I just slept in my tent.
Right.
Um, yeah, the shelters along the way, I would, if you do encounter one, I would probably be inclined to not stay in it.
Right. What were the best or most interesting places that you stayed? One or two best, most
Yeah,
memorable.
so two interesting places um, were there's this. I'm not even sure how to describe it. It's a resort. It's Feast Creek Resort, and you walk down into out of Indiana. I'm sorry, Idaho, and you walk into this crazy. It's pretty resort. We'll call it. It's a bar, it's a hotel, but you cannot stay at the hotel. But the gentleman, I forget his name, he lets you stay in the yard. And I'm looking at this place, wondering, why does this place exist? There's no way this is a self-supporting location. It's called Feast Creek Resort, and I just couldn't understand. And I was imagining all of these like sort of nefarious things, like this is got to be some sort of marijuana way to legitimize the grow operation that the guy owns in Washington or something. And this is how he manages his income. I was imagining all these nefarious things. The guy, who knows. And it turns out that I wasn't too far off, except that what he was doing there was totally totally legit. The railroad tracks go through this valley, and what he does is he literally rents the hotel 7 days a week, all year long, to the railroad. They pay for all these rooms, and they pay to keep the hotel, the restaurant and bar open, so that their train conductors who are coming out of Canada can stay there at a moment's notice if they need to, for whatever delays. I don't understand exactly the logistics, but anyway, whatever the railroad is there pays for this entire resort, and so that's how he's able to stay open. But the gentleman is super nice and allows hikers to stay there. You can stay in the yard and buy food from the restaurant. And he was so friendly and so nice. I wound up staying there for 2 days and doing laundry and things. And the second morning, well, actually the evening before, he gave me the keys to the restaurant and said, "Hey, when you get up in the morning, go fix yourself a nice breakfast." And, it's got a walk-in cooler and all of these, all the things that go with it, and a commercial stove. And, he literally just gave me free run of the place. And so, I took advantage of that and left a donation. And this place also accepts drop boxes or mail drops.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic. So that was Feast Creek. And then the other most interesting town, which preceded Feast Creek, was Polebridge. As you walk out of Glacier, the first town you encounter is Polebridge. And this is a completely off-the-grid town. There are restaurants, there's a bar, there's a hostel outside of town. And it was just such a special, unique place. It's a bit of a tourist destination, which made it really fun because it had sort of a festive feel. I think we were also there on maybe the day after July 4th, and a lot of people were there.
Right.
And it's just neat. It's neat to see a whole off the grid town. So that was fantastic. And then the rest of the towns were sort of run of the mill, but there are plenty of opportunities to encounter wonderful trail towns, some better than others. One of the things that I was struck by is that the people along the trail are recognizing the value of the PNT to bring economic activity into their communities. And so there are a lot of people who are being really progressive about opening hostels and becoming hiker friendly. And so that was really cool to see. And it's just sort of this, I believe the term would be burgeoning hiker economy, which I thought was really, really just fantastic.
That is. Yeah. Where can others learn about the trail? What would be the information sources for them to go to?
Sure. So, there's obviously Guthook is mostly how I navigated, but
Guthook is a phone application.
It is, yeah. And it's really pretty great. That I think I might have been the first, or I think I was the second season where it was available, and I was grateful for it. It did a good job. Relatively few inaccuracies given the terrain. Although where there are inaccuracies, they are doozies. Usually it's involving a bushwhack. So other resources would include the Pacific Northwest Trail Town Guide. And then the other one is the Pacific Northwest Trail Digest. Both of these books were pretty invaluable, particularly because our logistics were relatively challenging, with meeting Kara and everything. So those two publications were really important. Also, the PNTA has a great list of resources. They are a proactive organization, and they're really trying to treat the trail well, balance priorities, and dial in the trail because it's rugged and raw, and you should definitely understand that this is a new trail before going into it. So the PNTA I would absolutely use as a resource. They have a good Facebook presence, social media presence, and their staff is incredible and can point you in all sorts of directions.
Yeah, that's the Pacific Northwest Trail Association, right?
And
I think they are pnta.org. Is that?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And yes, I've been looking at them. As you said, the social media presence, and now in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, they are giving nearly daily updates in terms of status of areas where the trail is, but essentially right now people are not hiking.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah.
But they are being very proactive in that regard.
Yeah.
Are there safety, security, or health concerns that you have not mentioned?
Yeah, there are inherent risks on any through hike. The risks specifically associated with the Pacific Northwest Trail. Water's not really an issue. You do go through some pretty arid sections where you can get yourself into trouble. The biggest issue really is navigating some of the bushwhacks. There are several bushwhacks around the Lions. Well, there's one, the Lions Head area, that that bushwhack presents a pretty good challenge. I was unable to find any sort of trail for a long way. I think it's like 6 or 8 miles, and it basically took me almost an entire day to accomplish it. It was compounded by the fact that when I did it, it was hailing. If anybody has ever wondered, hail balls when standing up to your mid thigh in a rushing river will in fact stick to your leg hair. I had lightning and thunder and hail. And whiteout rain. It was fairly challenging and even a little dangerous. I definitely ran the risk of slipping and falling off of objects, trees, rocks. And then there was another bushwhack, which it's a bit of an ironic bushwhack because it's within like 30 miles of the PNTA headquarters, but I think it's about a mile of what I can only describe as blackberry hell. Okay, you are going through this bushwhack. It's blackberries is twice as thick as my thumb, just entwined everywhere. I have a picture of Kara as she emerged from this, sitting on the ground with no fewer than 1,000 lacerations on her.
Right.
It is. She's got a big grin on her face, but she's got blood all over her face, all over her arms, all over her legs. Somehow or another, I managed to get through with only one scratch, but she looked like she lost a fight with a bobcat. So, yeah, that would be one area of concern. Another area of safety, obviously the bears. We did carry bear spray the entire length of it. So just because I didn't have any real bear encounters doesn't mean that other people won't, or can't. So that's an issue. I did see rattlesnakes in eastern Washington. And I did leave the Olympic Peninsula with a case of Giardia, despite filtering all my water through the Olympics and along the coast. I did still manage to get sick from that. So, which I have to believe that I'm fairly resistant to it, having been exposed to it dozens of times and not gotten it. I've been with people who have gotten it from drinking from the same source that I did, where I did not get it. And so I have to believe that the concentration is very high through the Olympics.
You mentioned a couple of paragraphs ago a couple of books that are informational. 2 books that I have read on the Pacific Northwest Trail are, first of all, Ron Strickland's mostly biographical account, Pathfinder. Which talks about the actual process of building this trail over 30 years. And Ron Strickland is alive and well and with us still, so I hope that he gets to listen to this podcast. And hi, Ron. And
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you from so many people. And then there's Grizzly Bears and Razor Clams. And that is a book by a guy named Chris Townsend, who's an English guy, I think, right?
Oh, fantastic. Oh, it's true. Razor clams. Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's wonderful.
So
it's true. Absolutely true.
I read Grizzly Bears and Razor Clams to my children when they were, I think, maybe 7 years old, cover to cover, as part of my efforts to propagandize them about the outdoors.
Fantastic.
So it was the first full adult book that they had read to them. It's entertaining. It's a good book.
I am absolutely going to get that. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. I had not heard of it. It's so great.
It is a straightforward travelogue, but
okay.
But of course, the Pacific Northwest Trail is so interesting that it makes a pretty good travelogue.
Yeah. Well, you bleed a lot. The razor clams are real. I lacerated my leg quite severely, actually.
Now those are in when you get to the coast, right?
Yeah. It's great. It's fantastic.
All right, so that's my little excursion off to.
No, that was great.
what I've done, what research I've done. But what were the costs for this trip? Obviously, you had to fly. You had to fly there. Where did you fly in and out of?
Yeah, so I have done through hikes on a tiny little shoestring budget. This hike was probably more expensive than most of my other hikes, even though it was shorter, because I was operating within such a strict timeline. Normally, I would, budget my travel. I don't think I've ever actually flown to a location to start a trail before. I usually figure out some cheap and more interesting way of doing it. But I did have to fly into Kalispell, and I did have to fly out of Seattle.
Uh-huh.
Both of those were fairly expensive, particularly the flight out of Seattle, because I didn't know exactly when I would finish, and so I wasn't able to purchase the airplane ticket well in advance and secure a less expensive ticket that way. So also, I was not shy about staying in hotels on this trail. I stayed, I don't even know how many hotels, but pretty much when I presented with the opportunity. And normally on a through hike, I would be in proximity to the other hikers, but in this case, I was not around other hikers, so I couldn't capitalize on sharing hotel rooms and things like that. So yeah, hotels and travel were relatively more expensive on this trail than other trails, and part of that is just because of how remote it is, and part of it is because of my timeline. So I think that you could do it on a budget if you wanted to, if you needed to. Comes down to being creative, which I was not able to be. Obviously, food is up there. I did not have to purchase any gear beyond like the Ursack for this. I pretty much had everything, although after everything's shredded, I will have to replace almost my entire kit. So, so that'll be fairly expensive. But
what are the variables in the costs that one could factor in or out in terms of making the trip more or less comfortable and more or less affordable for oneself?
Sure. Well, one area of savings would be starting a little bit later in the season and avoiding having to deal with snowpack. You could cut your weight by not having to either cut your weight and expense by not having to buy snow gear and having heavy clothing. One area that I would suggest spending more on would be good rain gear, because it does rain a lot throughout the entire trip. So good rain gear would, sizable investment. Yeah, I wore a Patagonia Houdini Alpine that did a pretty good job. It's a balance between waterproof and lightweight. I think a heavier rain jacket might be advantageous, actually. And I'm not somebody who would normally advocate good rain gear, but in this case, I think it's appropriate.
Leaning more towards an alpine parka instead of an ultralight through hiking type rain gear. Yeah. And also, one of the reasons there is durability. Having this gear on, having heavier gear on through some of the bushwhacks, absolutely would be valuable in terms of, stopping potentially thousands of skin lacerations. Right. And how were you able to make space for this in your life in terms of time and money?
Yeah, so I pissed a lot of people off at work, which is sort of par for the course if you're going to leave for a couple of months at a time. But it was relatively challenging to do that. Part of it is fully employed and not really young anymore, so I have a mortgage and financial obligations. I've been pretty good about staying out of debt, but I do have a mortgage. I paid off my student loans and everything, so that's nice. But I do have a full-time job, and so making room for that was challenging. As I mentioned earlier, my girlfriend at the time, Kara, had a tremendous role in the planning of this, and also coming and joining me. And I probably should have spent more time talking about her role in orchestrating everything, because she really made it happen. And so for her to be able to come out for a total of 4 weeks was very challenging in terms of making room for that. But she did make it happen, so that was challenging. And then there was also the making of the room for meeting my lovely and dearest and most intimate friends from the PCT to make room for Mount Rainier and Mount Shuxton, and just a generally wonderful week. Shout out to Butters, Lullaby, and Saji, the Dragon Slayers. Were reunited for about a week, and it was wonderful.
Yeah. What are your favorite podcasts, blogs, magazines, or other sources of information?
Oh gosh, this is so boring. I love podcasts, but I unfortunately am like a total news junkie. So I did pretty much listen to the Daily every day, just to, especially in other politically charged times, or politically discharged times, I might not have paid so much attention to political podcasts, but news is moving so rapidly these days. I really had a hard time tuning that out, and so I didn't. So yeah, the Daily. But then I listened to a ton of recorded books. I listened to several Noah Yuval Harari books.
Right.
21 Lessons for the 21st Century, Homo Deus. And these books, they're like 30 hours long. And so, I listened to all of them. They were just fascinating and wonderful. What a mind. Certainly listened to some Jared Diamond, and then normal podcast, like political podcasts, some philosophy podcasts. I do have a love-hate relationship with Sam Harris. And sometimes I can get through a Joe Rogan podcast, not always. Yeah, lots of recorded books.
So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about a lot of time listening to the recorded books, and it occurs to me that one thing that we did not touch very much on that I hear among people talking about the PNT is the road marches. And
yeah.
Also discussed the clear cuts and places where there have been forest fires. So are these, which of these, talk about the road marches and about the others if you feel it's appropriate. And
sure.
And is this where you were listening?
Yeah, I mean, you can only listen for so long, so it's nice to have a break. And the road march. So I have a weird relationship with road marches, which is that I freaking love them. And so, that's pretty advantageous on the Pacific Northwest Trail, because I don't know what the statistics are on the percentages of single track versus Forest Service road versus actual road walks, but there is a tremendous amount of road walking, and you have to be okay with that, because if you're not okay with it, you are not going to be happy. I am very lucky in that I am able to entertain myself. I absolutely love picking up bizarre things on the side of the road and playing with them. And I can do it for hours. I like I said earlier in the podcast, I found a pool noodle that I was able to wear on top of my ice axe to prevent my poking my girlfriend's face with it repeatedly. And just garbage along the side of the road is infinitely fascinating to me. At one point, somewhere, I picked up a tensioner, a power line tensioner that the power company uses to couple power lines together. The thing weighed about 5 pounds and was about 12 inches long, stainless steel, from somebody who loves machine work. It was, kind of a work of art. And I spent an entire day just fiddling with this thing and flipping it and spinning it and, seeing the tricks I could do in my left hand. I'm right-handed. So it was infinitely fun. And if you're not able to sort of be creative and take advantage of this time walking along these what would be monotonous roads, you might not be too happy with the PNT. But fortunately, I actually enjoyed them. It's also because of the way the PNT is oriented, where you're having to really work hard to cross mountains. Frankly, walking along the road is a welcomed relief in many locations. But it's also dangerous. There are absolutely sections that you could die. And I'm not gonna lie, I am a purist. I was not even happy to take the ferries where required, or the one ferry that's required I actually spent a couple of hours trying to figure out how I could kayak that section, because I did not want, I wanted continuous footsteps. And so there are definitely sections that a lot of people would be perfectly happy to skip, road sections that I was not willing to compromise on. And it's, I had close calls for sure. You definitely need to be aware. And actually, I should have, that should have been my answer when you talked about health or safety risks. Absolutely, getting hit by a car is a real possibility in at least 3 locations on 3 roads throughout the length of the PNT. So that's something to be aware of.
Maybe taking a traffic triangle to put on your bag or something.
I actually, there were some sections where I picked up, I believe I found a ski pole on the side of the road, and I held it perpendicular to my body,
Yep.
to force people into driving around me,
Right.
because they're not used to seeing people walking on the road because the PNT is so sparsely populated. They're just not used to it, or they just don't care, and they will drive right next to you at 60 miles an hour, and it is freaking terrifying, particularly when you're, in between a car and a guardrail, which frequently you are.
Right. Of the trails that you have through hiked or been on, which one is your favorite?
I remember after the AT, people always asked, well, what's your favorite state? And I never had an answer for them because, frankly, all of the states are lovely. And so that's also true of the long trails that I've hiked. I gotta say, though, that my experience on the Arizona Trail was fairly unparalleled. I was lucky when I did that through hike. I actually hiked with a dear sweet friend of mine. His name's Hopeful. He did the CDT in I guess 2018. Yes, 2018. We did the Arizona Trail together in 2017, and that trail is like condensing the entire PCT into 800 miles. It is fantastically beautiful. And I was super lucky because the year I hiked happened to be a 21-year super bloom. And so I walked through a garden for 800 miles, and it was magnificent. The idea of starting at the Mexico border and within 8 miles of the Mexican border, walking through snow. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, who could even imagine such a thing? And then I had never seen the Grand Canyon before. And so, the Grand Canyon's roughly 100 miles from the end. And so walking 700 miles and getting to the Grand Canyon and seeing this majestic, magnificent feature was just unparalleled. Just so spectacular, so special.
So that was 2017, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the next 21-year bloom is in 2038.
Yep. Yeah. I'll
Put it
do
on
it
your
again
calendars,
in 2038.
folks.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, it was just fantastic. What a trail. What a trail. And the what is it? The AZT. They really have their act together. I don't know if they're super well funded or their leadership is tremendous, but they are really working hard on that trail, and it shows. It is. I mean, it's just glorious. I can't speak highly of it enough.
That's great to know. What is the trail that you dream of doing?
Oh, all of them.
Fatherhood.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. So I think, I've got it in my head to do the Great Divide Trail. I think that I think that's probably the next realistic one on my list. Although I'm pretty interested in some of the trails in Europe. I've not spent much time in Europe, and so I'm gonna have to figure that out. But I'm kind of thinking the Great Divide Trail. It's obviously not going to be this summer or next summer, but maybe the summer after. I'm really inspired by Buddy Backpacker.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you're familiar with that group or not, but those folks are really inspirational. I have yet to meet them. I thought they were on the Pacific Northwest Trail the year I was hiking, and I was anticipating meeting them, but I never did, and I'm not quite sure what happened. I'm not super active on social media. I just knew they were out there, and I don't know if they finished ahead of me or whatever. But those folks are really inspirational, and so I am hoping to get my little fellow out and get him through hiking early.
Great Divide Trail is in Canada going north
Mm-hmm.
from Glacier, Waterton National Parks, right?
Yeah. I don't do a lot of planning. That's just not what I do. It's kind of like me being lazy with remembering names. I'm really lazy with planning. So I don't know anything about the trail. I just have seen pictures, and I think it's a good distance. I think it's a manageable trail.
What is the best way for listeners to find out more about your adventures?
Well, there isn't.
Not your focus.
Again, just not. Yeah, I'm just not interested in having a real big internet presence. Although I am super grateful and admire tremendously the content producers, and it's invaluable, and I think it's awesome. It's just not something that I would ever be good at or am too interested in pursuing.
Right. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. This is super exciting.
This has been a great talk with you, and you've really downloaded a lot of information on the PNT, a lot of things I hadn't heard before, so a lot of new information, and that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you to Rox, and congratulations, because he and his wife had a son a day and a half after this interview. The interview was recorded in late June, and it took me a long time to post this because I moved across the country in the meantime. Thank you for listening to the Trails Around the World podcast. Please visit us online at trailsaroundtheworld.com, and please join our Facebook group under the same name. If you liked this podcast, please help us out by leaving a review on your favorite podcast source, such as Apple Podcasts. This is Sky King, and I look forward to you joining us next time. In the meantime, happy trails to you, and please remember to leave no trace as you enjoy the outdoors.